So, Tartaria. This is a new topic I want to discuss in this video and maybe in other videos on this channel. It seems to be one very contentious topic that a lot of people have already talked about, and I think I want to try my best in discussing this. So this video will be an introduction to the concept of Tartaria, the different theories that exist about Tartaria, the Tartary, the Grande Tartaria, and everything in between and near it. I already once discussed Tartaria, I believe so, in a past video of mine, but it was very short and it was very condensed, so it was not the same format I am doing for this video. And in this video we will be discussing it with the knowledge I acquired in the past few days of research, where I actually checked out more information about Tartaria. So that said, I want to get right into it. First of all, what is Tartaria? So there's many different definitions of Tartaria, and of course there are some that are more academically accepted, and some that are less academically accepted, and some that have no academical basis but have different concepts. Alright, so let's start by that. First of all, we will see the ones that are academically accepted. Right? In that case, it is a historical name for regions in the north of Asia, specifically in the area in this map as we are seeing it. So Grande Tartaria is a region, or at least this is what many people think it is, and it is a region that encompasses basically the north of Russia, so mainly Siberia, the parts of the northern Caucasus that are north of Georgia but east of Ukraine, then the areas in modern-day China basically that are not Chinese Han majority, so we can see places like Tibet, Xinjiang. Tibet is one of those regions that has not always been considered Tartaria, but can be considered Tartaria. Then we have regions like the Manchuria region of China, then Mongolia, then the entirety of the Turkic states in Central Asia, so mainly just the entirety of Central Asia, and even some parts of the far east of Russia. So this is the area we are discussing about. As you can see, it is seen in this map. So this map here is a French map, which we can see just here because it's Carte d'Asie, and it's made in, I think, 1704 or 1794, anyways, in the 18th century. And if we go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, we can see that they have in 1771 Tartary, so the English name of Tartaria, because Tartaria is a Latin word. We can see that it is described as a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, surrounded by Siberia on the north and west. It's called Great Tartary. The Tartars, who lie south of Muscovy and Siberia, are those of Astrakhan, Circassia and Dagestan, situated northwest of the Caspian Sea. So the Tartars seem to be a population, not only just part of this region, but seem to be a specific population, which can be agreed upon and not agreed upon. Then let's see our theories about what Tartaria is. So this is basically what the academical consensus is, that it was a region basically that was historically present since like the 1200s, basically the 13th century, maybe even before, maybe definitely after it, and it was present in history books of, or well, at least historical accounts of Europeans, and it was generally considered a vast region that was completely unknown or mostly unknown to Europeans. This changed in history, of course, because eventually this region would be discovered and would be more acknowledged by the people of the surrounding regions, and of course there are many other states in history that have more specific accounts of the regions of Tartaria. So once again we can see that this makes it seem that Tartaria is just a name for a region that's shifted in the place and time, sometimes being very large, sometimes being very small, and sometimes just being a union of different regions that already have specific names. But that is not all that Tartaria is, or at least that is not all that Tartaria is considered to be in the modern day. Tartaria has many different lines of theories that explain what it actually is, and it kind of diverges into many different hypotheses that regard Tartaria as a whole. So this is another map. This is even old, an even older map. As you can see, it's unfortunately very bad in the quality of the map, but that's not really important because we just need to see that it represents Tartaria. And as you can see in here, Tartaria is a region north of the Persian area, the Indian area, Chinese area, and it does kind of coalesce with like modern day Kazakhstan and like Siberian Russian, so even just the area of Russia that is east of Europe. So as you can see here, we have more accounts of Tartaria being recognized as something that existed in the past. In this map, and this is the interesting part, in this map you can see that the characters of the like names that are used for the different regions are in a specific way. And it is interesting that Russia, which is a country, and we know it is a country, is in the same characters as Tartaria. So according to this map, Russia and Tartaria are two separate but distinct countries, which would mean that Cartaria is not just simply a region, but it is actually a country. But once again, this is it's very debated, right? It's not something certain. So now that we talked about this, let's see the second group of people that believe Tartaria is something else. So we saw how some people believe Tartaria is a region's name and there's never been a unified Tartary, but then the second group of people are some people that believe there was a super advanced Tartarian civilization that has been suppressed in the history books. So how can that be? How can a region of this size and this prominence in history be suppressed in the history books? And generally, how can it be a unified entity and not just the name of a region? Well, it is linked, so apparently the origins of this kind of thoughts regarding Tartaria are linked to some older thoughts of Russian nationalists that claim Tartaria not to be a different entity from Russia, but to be the original and ancient name of Russia. These Russian nationalists believe that Tartaria is not just a simple region of Russia or a simple region of Asia, but it used to be the real Russia. So you can see in this picture here that is definitely like an art piece, but it is what kind of these people believe, alright? So they believe there is a real Russia that was suppressed and then a fake Russia that was allowed to exist. This is a lot of a conspiracy theory, so it's not something that can be proved in like the modern consensus, but there are some points to their theory when it comes to one of the reasons they believe this. They believe that there is things called mud floods, which are a real like phenomenon, which did basically cover the southern parts, like the interior and like the bottom of the buildings that once existed in this Tartarian state, in the state of the Tartary. They believe that these buildings used to be way bigger and used to be way like more prominent, and that the reason why when you go into a building and you excavate underneath the building and you find other buildings or the same building going on and on beneath the earth, the reason for that is that the mud floods ruined the building that existed there and had most of it covered. And they attribute that kind of process to the end of the Tartary. But then we come to another group of people that believe that the Tartary isn't just this region in like this part of Asia, but they believe that the Tartary was actually a super advanced empire. And the super advanced empire was not something that only existed in this region, but that had colonies all around the world. So there are some people like in the United States or in Europe that believe that all of buildings that have common features like star forts or like very ancient buildings in the United States that have like underneath levels of them that have been covered by the ground, they believe that is the evidence of Tartaria existing as a unified country and as a super advanced empire. Once again, when you actually go search for proof of this, it is flimsy at the best. You don't find much of the evidence you would suppose to exist, especially the one that links these places to Tartaria. So as I came to understand what they are saying, they basically say that Tartaria was a unified state, it was a super advanced civilization, And the reason we can confirm this is because all of these buildings look kind of the same and have been like put underground by these mud floods. But then I have to go and make a counter hypothesis. How can that prove Tartaria? You can prove mud floods with that. You can prove that there are buildings that were like that they went through mud floods, that they went through this process of destruction and rebuilding on top of them, but you can't prove these are all part of a single Tartarian civilization. You could even go the other mile and say that these are parts of a like advanced ancient civilization, but even there you couldn't prove that is linked to Tartaria itself, so this specific state, this specific region, this specific area. Then we go to the next people, the people that don't believe that there was an advanced civilization of Tartaria, but believe definitely and without a doubt that Tartaria was and used to be an independent country that was in the process of the 18th and 19th century clawed out by the surrounding powers of the region and that eventually lost all its independence. I used to like this theory, okay? So I used to like this theory a lot because it made sense from some points of view. Their theory of Tartaria being basically dismembered by the surrounding powers is not imagination. It actually has real foundations in history and it makes sense. Let me show you what I mean. So, when people talk about Tartaria, they talk mainly about a unified state in the Tartary. And while most people would say no, that didn't exist, or no, that never existed, I can definitely say yes, it did exist, but it didn't call itself Tartaria, which would make sense considering it that Tartaria is in itself a Latin word, so you can't have a name that is Latin be used by the people of a country in Asia to describe themselves. Let's see these examples of unified Tartarias. The first I want to take is the Göktürk Empire. The Göktürk Empire, as we can see in this map of 576 AD, was an empire that stretched all the way in the region of Tartaria, from Vladivostok, so modern-day far eastern regions of Russia, to the Crimean Peninsula even. Or at least there have been presences in the Crimean Peninsula, but we can see at least their presence arrives to the Volga River. So at least that, which is this river right here. So the Göktürk Empire was an example, a historically accepted example of a unified Tartary. Many people would say, well, that is not Tartaria, because it is too much in the past. It's 576 AD, and the European powers that defined Tartaria in their maps did not put Tartaria in their maps and any kind of sort of that kind of region until later. But I have to remind you that the way history works, especially in that kind of times, was that people would get sources from other regions in a way later stage. So the Göktürk Empire would run its course and exist as this unified entity of nomad, ruled by nomad tribes of Turks or proto-Turks, and they would rule this entire area here, as you can see, which does correspond to the majority of the Tartary, except for the very uninhabitable regions of Siberia, which are usually not really controlled by any historical power because they are too cold. And this entire state would rule this area and would create buildings and would create archaeological sites in this entire area. So you could prove Tartaria, as in the Göktürk Empire, through this. But once again, you can't prove this is a super advanced civilization because none of their buildings, which are in a very different style from the ones that are imagined to be these buildings of the super advanced Tartarian civilization, they don't correspond to the ones that were built by the Göktürk Empire. So you can't say this is Tartaria as in the Tartaria of the super advanced civilization that spans the entirety of the world, kind of, but you can't say this is Tartaria as a unified independent state that is a single country, which is way more than most people would agree upon, because most people don't even agree Tartaria is a single state, they think it is just a region. Then let's go to other maps I found about Tartaria. Here we can see the map of Abraham Ortelius. This was made very long ago, I believe in the 16th century, So this is after the time span of the Goktuk Empire, very later from that, but it is before these maps right here. As you can see here, the borders of Asia are very not well defined. It was still in a previous period of European history where you couldn't really know the exact borders. I believe this horribly looking mass is America and this is California, so you can see just how bad it looks compared to what we now know the American continents look like. You can see Japan just looks kind of awful. Right here, Japan is just not looking how it's supposed to look, and Korea isn't even there. So yeah, this is definitely not a very precise map of the area, but what we do notice is the presence of Tartaria. And as you can see, Tartaria is named in a different color from the rest of the map. It is named in red. And it is the focus of this map, because this is the map of Tartaria, of the Kingdom of Tartaria. So in this map, made by Abraham Ortelius in the 16th century, you can see in the 1500s, same thing, you can see that Tartaria is defined as a kingdom, so as a unified state. Now, how could this be if we just talked about the Goktuk Empire being in 576 AD, or at least in this time frame here, and not being all the way up to the 16th century? Well, that is very simple. Once again, the transportation of knowledge was very slow in those times, but it does not support such a great leap in time. So the way we explain this region as called as Tartaria and it being named as a kingdom is both because the people of the time that made this map, so Abraham Ortelius, did not know that Tartaria was not unified anymore, but we can link it to another unified Tartaria example, because in fact there's not one Tartaria example, but there's multiple examples of a unified Tartary, and this one is the most well-known one, but many people just don't link to this Tartaria, and it is the Mongol Empire, because in fact the Mongol Empire in its height included the entirety of livable Tartaria. In fact, every single part of Tartaria which was livable in those times and required some kind of civilization to rule it was part of the Mongol Empire, and the Mongol Empire was in the 13th and 14th centuries. So that means it is way closer to the time frame of the making of this map than it is with the Goktuk Empire as we saw before. Now, let's talk about the Mongol Empire for a bit. The Mongol Empire was an advanced civilization. While many times it's been talked about like it's ancient kind of retrograde civilization that didn't really appear as the actual level of their surrounding countries, that is just genuinely false, because by the right of conquest and by the conquests that the Mongol Empire imposed on the people surrounding it in its journey of expansion, it assimilated the cultures and mostly the technologies that these populations would use, and in a certain amount of time it would become the most advanced civilization on Earth at the time, greatly surpassing any European civilization and definitely encompassing any other advanced civilization that existed in the time. So at one point there was a Tartaria, so let's just recount this. So at one point there was a unified Tartary. It was part of a global, or at least most of the world ruling empire, and it was in fact the most advanced civilization that existed in the world. How is that not proof of Tartaria? That is literally what Tartaria is believed to be. The only difference between this and what many people believe Tartaria to be is in the name, so Tartaria. Of course, there is also an ethnic component we haven't talked about. Many of the Tartarian proponents believe the Tartarians are mostly European-like and they look more like Russians, so that's once again a link between the Russian nationalist kind of view of Tartaria and the Tartaria as a super advanced civilization kind of thing. But in the case of the Mongol Empire, of course, Chinggis Khan and his descendants and everybody that ruled the Mongol Empire wasn't really of European or Russian stock. In fact, the Russians were in fact conquered by the Mongol Empire. Although there is a theory that just represents Russia not as a simple state subjugated by the Mongol Empire, so like in this case the Tartarian horde, but eventually it would become a successor state of this empire. And this is one of the reasons they link themselves with Tartaria this much, because they believe that Tartaria is in itself an extension of Russia, and therefore the Mongol Empire, which conquered Russia, can't be Tartaria because they were conquerors, not predecessors. There's also one sideline of this kind of theory and these groups that believe, in fact, the Russians to be like the successor states of the Mongol Empire, and they kind of have weird theories I don't want to dwell in because they kind of result into very controversial, and not much as controversial, but more like just insulting terms against the Russians, because there's a lot of hate towards Russians nowadays because of certain actions of a certain leader, which I won't dwell in because of course that's very controversial and it would get my channel blocked. But that said, let's go back to the Mongol Empire and talk about how it ended. The Mongol Empire did not end by getting conquered. In fact, it ended in a very slow and just kind of depressing way, the ceasing way, decomposing way. It ended first by the division into 4 khanates in the Mongol Empire that still remained legally de jure part of the Mongol Empire. As you can see, we have the Khanate of the Golden Horde, the Il Khanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Khanate of Great Yuan. Great Yuan dynasty, basically. So these 4 khanates are the descendants of the Mongol Empire as a unified state, and these 4 khanates have different forms of government, and they take inspiration from the region they conquered. The Il Khanate and the Khanate of the Golden Horde both eventually converted to Islam, so they became Muslim states, of course with a big Mongol Turkic component, but still Muslim states. These are the Il Khanate right here, which was mostly influenced by the Persians living there, and the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde is one of the states that most people link up to Tartaria because it is considered one of the greatest expressions of it. They are of Tartarian stock because the people in those times were also called Tatars, and the Tatars lived exactly in the reign on the territories of the Golden Horde. And these are the states that ruled upon the Russians by making them tributaries into very divided city-states and ruling them for centuries. Eventually, the Russians, through the state of Muscovy, would take back what they lost from the Golden Horde, would unify and eventually beat the Golden Horde, which then became the Great Horde and then finally nothing, because it was conquered by the Russians. The Chagatai Khanate was originally the one that remained more linked to the original concept of Mongol heritage of the Mongol Empire. For a while it was considered like the capital Khanate of the great Khanates of the Mongol Empire, but eventually it became the longest living one, but not the most important one, because it didn't have any other important areas to rule over, and therefore that made it so that it was just not the biggest thing in the time. Then we go to the Yuan dynasty. And this one was definitely the most important and most powerful Khanate, the ruler of the Mongol Empire, which once again was this kind of union of these 4 Khanates after the death of the original rulers of the Mongol Empire. Well, the ruler of the Yuan dynasty was kind of the ruler of the entirety of the Mongol Empire, but not all for all time, because eventually these 4 Khanates went their separate ways and eventually one after the other collapsed. In the case of the Yuan dynasty, it collapsed after the basically Ming rebellion, which made it so that the Chinese ethnic dynasty was going to overthrow the Yuan dynasty, which was of course of Mongol heritage. But that isn't to say that the Yuan dynasty was not advanced. In fact, it was a super advanced civilization compared to all of their neighbors. It was at one of the best stages of Chinese history because it coalesced many cultures that were important through the Mongol Empire's Mongol Empire's conquests and the original Chinese and Mongolian cultures, which can be seen even by the travels of Marco Polo, which I'm not going to dwell in because I hope everybody already knows about the travels of Marco Polo. It's a pretty known about topic. Then we can see this map in 1806. So this one is probably the most detailed map I have of the Great Tartary and Tartaria as a whole. This map shows a new map of Chinese and independent Tartary, and it was made by John Carey in 1806. This map is probably the best looking one that shows the Tartary. It also shows that Tartaria in this point of time were not only owned by other states, because in 1806, as you can see, there are parts, of course, owned by other countries, like China. Chinese Tartary right here, it's written, Chinese Tartary, there we go. Then you have the Russian Tartary, or modern-day Siberia and non-European Russia. But then again, we do have, and we can see it right here, an independent Tartary. This part of the Tartary corresponds mainly to modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, the Central Asian republics. I mean, that's what they are now. Definitely wasn't those at that point in time, but that's what they correspond to in their modern time. So you can just see that even in 1806, there were accounts of an independent Tartary, which by itself can't be just ignored because it's literally 1806. You'd expect the Europeans, which literally owned this part of the world and were owning much of Britain, much of India was starting to be conquered by the East India Company, and there were many expeditions into this area at the time. So it wasn't there in the past that Europe didn't know about these parts of the world. They did know, and in this case, they still decided to figure this part of the world as an independent Tartary. So you can't just ignore that. Finally, we come to the last map of this video, which was made in 1840, and then this the map of the independent Tartary. This is the latest map where the Tartary is still shown as an independent entity, and once again as a united entity, which is crazy, because as you can see, it still makes it seem like it is a single country, which is insane considering that many of these maps would be refused by the scholars and the people that would just say, oh no, this is just a way to represent this. But we can clearly see that is not the case, because China, Persia, Russia, the Ottoman Empire, the Bukhara Khanate, Punjab state, all these places that are countries are shown as countries with their separate colors, with their separate borders, and like places like Georgia, which were part of the Russian Empire at the time, are shown as part of the Russian Empire. So to be in 1840 and having an independent Tartary shown as an independent entity not owned by any other power and shown as an united entity means there has to be some truth about it. It might not be a super advanced civilization that collapsed through mud floods and once again get all into this mess, but it has to be something that has not been considered the truth by academics. That's what I mean. Or at least that's how you could consider it. Once again, I'm not the one that is putting these theories out there, I'm just a reader. So in this case, this independent Tartary, what was it about? We have places like Khiva, Karam, there's a lot of places like here. You can have to see here, there's even a place called the Kyrgyz Little Horde. And there are like names of the people that lived here. Kyrgyz Middle Horde, Kyrgyz Kazakhs. So we can see that there are definitions of the people that lived here, and regions are in a separate, like, states, like Omsk. It's just part of Russia, as you can see. This region right here, Tibet, you can see the TIB here. It's part of China. And independent Tartary is different from Bukhara, which is this other sultanate that existed. Which means either one of two things. Either the independent Tartary was the last region for some reason of the world that was not explored by Europeans, or they knew what this was, and then this, for some reason, either for Russian political motives or motives of the surrounding major powers of the area, eventually this region was conquered and the history of it as an independent state was just suppressed. And once again, we can see that this region was not incapable of uniting and becoming a separate entity. Gokturk Empire, Mongol Empire, multiple post-Mongol empires, and even Russia when you think about it. Like, Russia is, in one way or another, currently the holder of the most part of the Tartary. Of course, there are these states of Central Asia and the parts of the Chinese Tartary that are not part of a independent Tartary, of course, that's clear, but they are still kind of linked to Russia in some way or another. I mean, just think of the USSR. The USSR was, in some way or another, the only state in history that owned the entirety of the Tartary in a single state. Of course, there were multiple republics, but it was the most recent example of this state of Tartary and of Tartaria. So let's recap this entire thing. We have three groups of people. 1. We have people that think Tartaria is a region. 2. We have people that think Tartaria is an independent, super advanced country, and they believe the mud floods destroyed it. 3. There are people that believe Tartaria is an independent, or at least was an independent state, an independent country, and it was a unified entity, and it was not a multitude of different little statelets that eventually got conquered by other powers. I explained these three theories to you. You have now to decide which one makes the most sense to you. Of course, once again, the proof is out there. You can search it for yourselves. I'm not going to be the decider of that. You're able to do that yourselves. But once again, there are examples for supporting each of these theories in one way or another. There are examples of Tartaria being a divided region by multiple statelets. There's examples like that for the Astrakhan Khanate. We have states that existed in this time period and exist before it. We have sources for them. But that doesn't mean that Tartaria cannot exist as an independent and united entity, because we do have historical examples of that. And at the same time, we do have examples of things like mud floods, and we do have examples of you going, like, excavating down in a building and finding other parts. Of course, you can just say that it's about time, and it's just the time that just makes the, like, you know, the entire deal with construction. But you can also say it's mud floods. So there's multiple theories. You have to decide which one you believe. I think I'm going to finish this video now for this concept, and I hope I will continue to discover it through you and with more research. If you have any other theories and you have anything to propose, any proof, any stuff like that that you think is linked to this concept, you're very gladly encouraged to comment it in the comment section so I can actually see it and learn more, and even just to share it to our viewers. And thanks for watching. I hope we can see each other next time. Subscribe to the channel if you like the content, and like the video if you did. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.